Tristan. Thanks for the demo and the talk. There was a big announcement last night for those of you on Twitter that Bullet is building on Celestia, and we're really thrilled to be working with Bullet because we feel that Bullet is a really good example of what Celestia was made for and designed for. These really high performance applications that couldn't exist anywhere else. And so that's what I want to dig in with you today. So maybe to start, give us tell us a little bit about your journey through, we talked about this last night, but you started in 2021 building an on-chain club on Solana, and then you realized that there were just too many limitations of building on a sort of shared execution, smart contract, general purpose L1, and that's what eventually led you to the realization that you needed to do this as an application-specific chain, and I guess more specifically a rollup. And then from there, we can talk about how that then led you to finding Celestia. So maybe walk us through your journey.
Yeah, for sure. I got started building full-time in crypto in 2021. That's when we came across Solana, and it was a very new chain. There was not many people building on it. We enrolled in, I think it was the second hackathon ever, and basically built what was a very janky options trading exchange. So always been doing derivative stuff, and that was quite exciting to us. We were building off the back of Serum. If you guys were back in 2021,
I remember that. I remember
it's kind of this FTX incubated project to build fully on-chain order book, and so the 0 to 1 innovation there was a lot of perp stuff, or just generally dexes that had been around in the Ethereum days were either off-chain order books, or they were just completely unusable on-chain order books that had ridiculous spreads and super high gas fees. So when I got into crypto more full-time at the end of 2020, start of 2021, I was using some of these Ethereum protocols, and I'm okay, I want to trade options on this thing, but it's a 5% spread, and then I have to pay $20 on the gas to execute against a smart contract. I'm no one's ever going to use this. This is crazy.
Maybe whales would use it, but
not
everyday
exactly.
people.
Yeah, exactly. I was just fresh out of uni. I was I'm not cashed up like a whale, so this is unrealistic for me to trade on. And then I guess we came across the Serum stuff. We thought it was very cool. SBF, no matter what you think of him, I think he at least pushed this thing, and it was pretty interesting what he'd built. They basically took all that order book logic and they put it into a smart contract. This was a very hard thing to do. You had to have quite a performant base layer. They looked and shopped around on a bunch of different platforms to do that. Most people at the time were doing the off-chain order book thing. DYDX was the market leader for perps back then, and it was basically a off-chain exchange that would settle back on chain. And then we started building off the back of that using Serum. Serum was pretty interesting. They were doing a bit of volume. We ended up doing a bit of volume over those years, but doing the fully on-chain order book thing is hard. You were basically working in this extremely compute constrained environment where you can't do a lot of things, and you can kind of get it working, and we did get it working, and we did 10-15 billion dollars of volume on that exchange, but it's really hard to scale it to the level of the Binances and these kind of entrenched centralized exchanges, because these guys have such an advantage over you in terms of performance and being able to provide liquidity. And so we kind of, I think, came to the humbling realization that people care more about the product experience, I think, and if you can offer something that is genuinely what they want to use, that they will trade on every day, that's not we're hiding behind this is a perfectly 100% decentralized product where every piece of code runs all around the world and everyone does everything. That's kind of, people want real products, and you need to solve real user problems there. And I think that was the frustration. Building Zeta was we could never make it the absolute best that we wanted to make it. And that's when we came across, I guess, the Sovereign Labs team, which is the rollup framework that we're built on. These guys basically pitched,
shout out Jem and Preston and Sovereign team.
Really smart bunch of guys who basically came from Consensus, came from AWS. They've been building rollup tech and blockchain tech for quite a number of years. So very, very experienced. I was very amazed at their depth of experience. And I guess I'd been a Solana maxi for so many years, and being able to talk to Ethereum people and kind of understand a little bit of that side of the roadmap, I think was interesting. And I would say the major appeal for us was performance. I'm an engineer. I really care about performance. I really care about making the exchange fast. No one wants to trade on a chain with 10 TPS, and that's kind of what a lot of rollups were doing. So it wasn't interesting to us to just no offense, build on an OP stack or Arbitrum Orbit or something like that. It's this thing is no better than Solana. And when I chatted to Anatoly from Solana, he's yeah, just don't build the Arbitrum of Solana. We don't need it. Solana's already faster than Arbitrum. It's already cheaper, has more TPS, all this kind of stuff. So we were just like, okay, we are definitely not going to be like a general purpose rollup for Solana. Like, it just doesn't need to exist. We need to really lean into application specific. And that was not the meta. Like, over the last 2 years, everyone was like infra for the sake of infra. It's kind of a weird circle jerk. And now everyone's like applications, revenue, all this kind of stuff. That's great. And so it's really nice that things have shifted in that direction. That's always been what we care about and what real businesses care about. And so, yeah, building this exchange, we really leaned into the infrastructure is just like there to provide the best possible application experience, which is trading and which is perps. So that's the nice thing working with the Sovereign guys with building in this kind of more modular stack. You can really make every trade-off that you want. For example, we were at a lunch yesterday with the Relay guys, and he was like, oh, we need all these kind of hooks to be able to do very fast bridging in. And he's like, oh, how much change would that have to be? And if we were building on like another person's blockchain, I guess it might take months. You have to submit some like EIP. You have to wait for all this kind of process. Sitting next to Jem, it's like, yeah, we could probably do this tomorrow. And I'm like, that's great. Let's just ship it. Work with the Relay guys. They can get bridging down on our chain to basically like a second, and it just like doesn't even feel like you're bridging into stuff. So being able to make those decisions very quick, I think, is just like a superpower and going to make us very agile. To be honest, like credit to Jeff and the Hyperliquid team. That's, I think, the fundamental choice that they made is like, we're not going to just build something on Ethereum. We're going to go build our own L1. We're going to run our own, validator network. We're going to co-locate it. We're going to make very fast, opinionated decisions, and we're going to move very quickly, and we're going to capture this market. And they absolutely crushed it. So I think in such a competitive, fast-moving market that perps is, I think that's like basically the only way to go.
Yeah. So I guess to double click a little bit on what were the specific features that you couldn't achieve on a general purpose L1. And by the way, you mentioned something that kind of irks me, which is a lot of people mistake what the modular stack is and the modular thesis is for what kind of happened in Ethereum in 2023, which was just a bunch of copy-paste EVM L2s that really did not innovate very much. As far as they innovated in terms of like making a more secure bridge, canonical bridge, things like that, but they did not innovate on being more application specific, having higher throughput, lowering the latency. And so I guess you mentioned some things to me yesterday about like how on Solana, when you're trying to do perps, you were leaking a lot of value to priority fees, to just the network or bots. You also fundamentally couldn't actually drive the latency any lower than just whatever the L1 latency was. And so I guess maybe just quickly touch on that, and then let's move on to some other more interesting topics.
Yeah, sure thing. I won't go into it too much because I kind of covered it in the presentation.
Yeah,
but speed was a big one. We just wanted to get the speed down to a level that was competitive with like the top perps DEXs as well as hopefully centralized exchanges.
Like centralized exchanges.
Yeah, exactly. Because like I want to compete with them long term. I always had this thesis over the last couple of years that like DEXs will get to a place where they compete with centralized exchanges, and I guess like crypto rails. I think like how centralized crypto finance happen is it's just like, okay, we have these tokens, we have Bitcoin, and then we're just going to build like a centralized bank and trading platform around that to trade these digital assets. But it's like, where's the Satoshi vision of we actually have to use cryptography to secure a bunch of this stuff? Now I'm suddenly giving up my private keys to CZ to manage my funds. Like, it's not very crypto, right? And the really cool thing about a DEX is like, everything is self-custody, everything is verifiable. You kind of know what you're doing every time you sign with your ledger. You kind of control your funds. And I feel like we kind of lost that with CeFi. And the cool thing is like, DeFi, it always felt like you had to pay the price. When you're trading on Uniswap, you had the high fees. It would take like a minute to kind of finalize and go through. And, I kind of started on Ethereum, obviously, and it was a bit of a painful experience. And then my magic moment was using Solana for the first time. I was like, oh my God, I just like sent USDC to my friend and it cost like a fraction of a cent and it was finalized in a couple of 100 milliseconds. Like, what the hell? This is like as good as using, like Robinhood or Revolut or one of these apps. It just felt kind of magical, and I can send cross-border stuff, and it's just fantastic. And I think continuing to kind of lean on that, push it even further to the extreme. Blockchains are getting much faster. Things are becoming more specialized. I think we're getting to a point, this year and over the next couple of years where I think blockchain applications actually will kick ass. Like, they'll be really enjoyable to use. Hopefully my mom and dad, even though they're not the target audience, will actually be able to use it. For example, we use Privy in the background. You don't have to manage your own private keys and seed phrases. Onboarding is going to be better. Fiat on-ramps are going to be better. Chains are going to be faster. All these kind of experiences, I think, are just going to get better and better. People are focusing a lot more on UX and actual applications now, which I think credit to Solana and a lot of the builders there. That was like what we've been pushing for the last couple of years. And now with like application-specific stuff, especially, you look at like everyone on the top 10 perps list, I think pretty much everything there is like app-specific chain at this point,
Yeah.
and I think it just makes a lot of sense. Not saying that we should have millions of rollups like David Hoffman says, and have this whole thing you have to bridge between. I hate that. Like I don't want to do that at all. But I think it makes sense for specific use cases. If there are things that need to be very fast and performant, that's really nice that you can kind of go in there, you can do all your stuff there, and now bridges are getting much faster. You can jump between all these different things. People are working on cool interop stuff. So yeah, I think we're just seeing technology evolve at a pretty breakneck pace.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier, I watched your live stream on the rollup last night, and you talked about how, and I know this was part of your journey, was like, you could be a full Solana rollup essentially and post all of your transaction data also to the Solana L1, but you kind of, I guess, maybe came up to some constraints there, and that's what led you to Celestia and using Celestia as sort of like the data availability like L1 for your use case. So tell us about like what makes Celestia specifically well suited to your use case as an application specific rollup.
Yeah. I think it's just like a scalability and throughput question. Like, I've seen some other perps exchanges, and they're also building on rollups that have pretty constrained DA or using Ethereum for DA, and they literally cannot onboard more traders or market makers because they can't actually scale their TPS anymore than they currently have. We spent months like building out all this Solana DA stuff, and it was like very complex problem building all these proofs and figuring out how to post data to Solana. You can kind of do it, obviously. It's a bit of a hack to like get around it and just like post raw bytes on there, and it works, and we kind of fought that for like some period of time. But then yeah, it was just like really hard to scale it, and we kind of came to the brutal realization that if you want to get this thing doing more than a few thousand orders per second, which is kind of what maybe like a handful of market makers would be doing if they're replacing quotes every like 10 or 20 milliseconds, you run up against those limits very quickly. And I think looking at the Celestia numbers, it's saying that like Gem is always like putting in my face, essentially saying like Celestia is like super scalable. They like nailed this like DA side of things, and yeah, I think that's like the really cool thing that like most of the top rollups that we've seen like use you guys. There's like Eclipse and a bunch of new perps dexes as well coming out that are all kind of like hammering the network and like pushing gigabytes through there. And I think yeah, looking at your guys' mainnet, some of the new ones that are coming out with Mammoth and like 20 plus megabytes per second of DA bandwidth, I think it's like pretty nuts. And I think why I was like excited by our partnership is like perps dexes just push a lot of data, and it's like a really good use case and like proves the point, I think, for rollups and for DA networks that we can actually kind of, even though it sounds like you guys have a lot of capacity, we can like probably tap you out if we get enough traction. So we can keep your engineers working.
Yeah. Well, fortunately, we're working on, so the next matcha upgrade, which gets us to 20 megabytes per second, is just the next thing. We're already working on the next upgrade, which I think will probably blow those numbers out of the water. So if everything like goes as we expect, we'll never run out of capacity, or we hope not to. But if you did fill it up, that would make my day too. So go for it.
Yeah, I think we need to get at least 100K TPS. This is probably like pretty far off that, but yeah, it's good. I mean, that's kind of what like NASDAQ and some of these places are doing. So I think that's kind of the upper limit, the ceiling of where we'd be getting to.
Yeah. And I mean, our goal with Celestia is that we don't want you to ever have to think about those limits, right? Like if you're building a centralized product, you don't think about those limits. It's just like, I scale up my cloud provider instances and things like that, and I'm fine. So I guess another thing, like controversially, Solana has this very famous sort of like tagline, which is IBRL, right? Increased bandwidth, reduced latency. And I feel that like kind of ironically, that's exactly what we're doing, but even better in a sense. Like I think of Celestia's contribution as an L1 that's focused specifically on just scaling raw block space. Like that is the maximal increased bandwidth that you can get. Now Celestia is also trying to reduce latency from the consensus layer, but can never get down to milliseconds. It's just not possible on an L1 with a distributed validator set. But that's where Sovereign Labs and the work that you guys are doing to reduce latency. And actually, I think it's absurd the latency that you guys are getting to. Like you guys are quoting like 1.2 millisecond latency. So anyway, I just react to that. Like, I think IBRL is the right North Star, but I think that the Solana architecture maybe runs up against hard limits that actually a modular architecture can exceed both IB and RL. So yeah, react to me about that and tell us about.
Yeah, definitely controversial topic. I mean, like I think people are solving different problems in different ways. I think Solana's vision for solving this is they want to build some like fully globally decentralized exchange, which I think is like a pretty bold vision. No one's even built it in like traditional, I don't think. Imagine you have like a order entry points in like 100 places around the world, and you can kind of be in Singapore and you can send your order and it will kind of synchronize and eventually get included in the New York cluster essentially. Like Anatoly always has this like analogy that some iPhone container shipment syncs in Singapore and that message basically gets like permeated through the network into New York, where it happens in that kind of financial hub here. There. I think that's pretty cool. I think it's an extremely complicated distributed systems problem that they're trying to solve, and I kind of like respect them for doing it. I think they've got like a multi-year roadmap where they're trying to work towards that. I think it's going to be pretty damn hard to kind of pull off without some kind of trade-offs, and I think that exchange will look very different to I think what we're trying to build now. Naturally, I think there was always like, I remember talking to the Ellipsis guys and they were like, yeah, like if you build the fully on-chain order books and you're building where everything gets executed on 1,000 different validators around the world, like you are basically like trading off saying like, I'm willing to take more of this geographic decentralization, but naturally there will be wider spreads because things are kind of slower and they have to do consensus and go and communicate around the world. They are doing some very cool stuff, like the new Alpenglow consensus mechanism, which got announced this year, takes their block times down to 150 milliseconds now, I think, from like 400, which is like really groundbreaking work. But I guess to get back to your point, yeah, like we're trying to build something a little bit different, which is more in line, I guess, with what we've seen work with traditional exchanges and centralized exchanges, where we're very confident this will work. And we're willing to kind of take the bet that like building this in a very performant, fast way where it's still verifiable and transparent is kind of the way to go, and something that we can ship literally like in the next couple of weeks rather than like in multiple years. And I think that's the cool thing about building on Celestia and building rollup stuff is it's a different approach. I think it has a different set of trade-offs. There's kind of this like, what needs to be synchronous, what needs to be asynchronous, right? The cool thing with the rollup is like, we're happy to give people pre-confirmations. People can talk to the sequencer. They can get these 1 millisecond pre-confirmations. Very low chance that they get rolled back essentially, like unless there is some like massive base layer DA liveness failure, which probably hasn't happened to you guys in a very long time, or even Solana.
Not yet.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
They're like very unlikely, and I think most people are willing to accept that trade-off, and like people want that very fast speed. Not only on the UI, if you're a trader, you want things to go through consistently, very fast, but also the market makers really care about this kind of stuff. It is really like a game changer for them. And if you were to show me like two products, one which is like this mega decentralized one that runs the same piece of code all around the world that gives you higher spreads versus something that's like extremely fast, extremely performant, but is able to be ZK verified, I think like a lot of people would naturally kind of tend to take that product, which delivers the better liquidity and the better user experience.
Yeah, so we talked a lot about Solana versus Celestia, right? I think we covered that topic. Now let's talk a bit about your competitor, or I think it is sort of your competitor. You mentioned them a few times, Hyperliquid. And like you are taking yet another approach that's different to Hyperliquid. They're an L1. Now all the validators are co-located, so that's a step in the right direction. But you specifically went for a rollup, single sequencer rollup. And I personally feel like this combination of like Bullet plus Celestia is redefining the state of the art, at least from a technical like execution spec perspective of what a decentralized exchange could be. And Hyperliquid did that themselves, but like it's almost like happening again in this new context. So maybe tell us about how you think about competing with Hyperliquid and yeah, like what do you think that this is a new state of the art?
I'm like pretty bought into it now. I mean, we've been building it for a year, and I think it just like continually impresses me with the kind of performance and the kind of trade-offs we can make in terms of building a really good product. So obviously, like I mentioned, if you were to build this like fully on-chain order book that runs on like a massive decentralized L1, you're obviously kind of trading off some of those like speed guarantees. Liquidity is going to be hard to get. That was kind of where I think the meta was 2-3 years ago. Hyperliquid kind of flipped that on its head. A lot of people were kind of big haters because they're like, you can't just put all the validators in the same data center and then just kind of run them together. And it's kind of like, it makes a trade-off once again that like people are happy for it to be kind of like slightly less decentralized, but still sufficiently decentralized. But it is like just arguably a much better exchange to trade on. That just kind of shows by the numbers that the Hyperliquid is doing at least 10x the volumes that like every Solana perps DEX is doing at the moment, and people clearly care about that. And now they have like 30 validators. They had maybe like 4 or 8 in the start, and they're continuing to decentralize and continuing to like win over customers. So I think that kind of roadmap works pretty well for them, and I think they've executed on that well. And then I think we kind of take it a step further. doing the kind of roll-up model, you can get even faster, you can get even more interesting guarantees. And I think this is like uniquely enabled by a bunch of the ZK stuff that's coming out, which was maybe not feasible like a year ago when they were really kind of getting their teeth into it. So I think that's very cool. I think the hot talk of the town that everyone's talking about now is like LiDAR and like, trading on that. That's also like a ZK rollup, which I think is really cool. So like, definitely admire their team that they've taken a bet on that, and that seems to be paying off very well for them, because I saw a bunch of posts that people are saying LiDAR is like 5 or 10 milliseconds latency, which is extremely fast. So they're obviously kind of considering like similar avenue and similar roadmap for us, and the fact that they're doing $5 or $10 billion of volume a day, I think is like very promising. And yeah, it's just like good that people are approaching it in very different ways. We're not just getting a bunch of copy paste forks of GMX, where we're kind of like, people are trying to innovate and they're trying to do their own thing, and some models will work better than others. We'll just have to see how it plays out. I think there's kind of green fields. You don't see this in traditional finance so much, because it's much more regulated. Things kind of happen at a much slower pace. Here in crypto, like, innovation moves very quickly, and I think it's kind of a sink or swim thing that you're going to see within the next couple of months, which ones do really well, which ones kind of struggle to scale.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think I covered most of the questions that I had. Is there anything that you wanted to mention?
No, I think I mentioned most of the things that I wanted to, yeah.
Amazing. Well, I'm really excited for you guys' testnet launch, your upcoming mainnet launch. I really think this is a new era in crypto, like exchange technology, as well as just crypto as like an application platform. And you guys are really pioneers. So it's just been a pleasure to be part of your guys' journey, and I'm going to be supporting you all the way. And I'm excited to trade. I didn't get to participate in the trading competition. I'm probably a shit trader. I'm a shit trader anyway, so that's not, I'm a builder. But maybe we can open it up to the audience if anyone has any questions that you're dying to ask. Now's your chance. So, anyone?
Thanks, Tristan, for the presentation. Just one question, a bit technical. You said each trade is just 1 to 2 milliseconds.
Yeah.
How do you do the cancel prioritization if it's so fast?
Really good question.
Very good question.
Yeah. So you can tell this guy, he's a market maker, so he knows what's up. So the way Hyperliquid works and the way that they did it, because they build their kind of discrete blocks, it was 200 milliseconds and now I believe 70 milliseconds. They could essentially do this like block building reordering. So you would pack the block, you would find you'd like sort through it, you'd find the cancels, you'd basically move them to the front, and that's how you pack the block. So definitely a bit different to us. I was like kind of looking through that, and I'm like, yeah, because it's transaction streaming, you can't do that. So we're adding something which is honestly like trivial to add in the sequencer. We already kind of have it in there, which is just like a fast and slow lane essentially for transactions. So we can kind of label different transaction types. For example, like if it's like taker trades, we can go there and we can just basically add an artificial speed bump. This is very similar actually to what happens in traditional finance. Funnily enough, I was explaining this to Nick last night, but in traditional exchanges, you tend to have a lot of market makers that are co-located in the same exchange server rack talking to the matching engine, which is like a physical box. And then a lot of like external people, like regular people who are kind of like trading through the platform, who aren't these like whitelisted market makers, will actually go through a physical like copper cable that is like wound around a bunch, and this adds like literal just like more distance to the wire, and adds like literal like microseconds to the trade execution time. And that just gives like slightly better market connectivity to the market makers. They can kind of respond a bit quicker. This just kind of like levels the playing field. If you were to kind of think about what's happening on a lot of these exchanges, kind of in the DEX space, there's just like a lot of centralized exchange, decentralized exchange arbitrage which happens. So, a market maker like the Ethereum guys, they would go and they would post a bunch of liquidity there, and then as soon as the prices change, someone is just writing some MEV bot that's essentially going and trading against this thing. It's like, oh yeah, you have a stale price, I'm just going to like pick you off, make a bunch of money off that. If I don't make any money, I just kind of roll back the transaction. And you kind of get this like, there's no risk to this guy to just basically go and like spam the chain and just try and like drain money from market makers. And it just kind of creates a bit of an annoying problem where those guys are posting liquidity, they're taking risk by kind of showing their hand and kind of posting these orders, and someone's coming in there risk-free as a taker and just going like picking them off all the time. And so by engineering, I guess, this like specificity in there where we can kind of give them a slight head start, it actually, I think, takes it from this like toxic race of trying to pick each other off to Now they can actually provide good quotes for retail people. Those retail people can trade into it. Retail people, you and me, when we're trading through a mobile app, we're not replacing quotes every millisecond, right? Like that's only the bots that are essentially doing that. So it's a way to kind of partition the flow that the makers are essentially trying to face people who are placing things on longer time horizons. You also see this in traditional exchanges. Like there's I forget the name. It's like an ALO order or something or that. Maybe I'm wrong on that. There's a specific order type that I think they came out with where when you place it, it basically has to sit in the order book for a minimum 1 second. You can't just like yank it all the time. And that just kind of encourages people to place like long-term trades, because typically a lot of these HFTs, Jump and a bunch of other guys are just going in there trading on these very high frequencies. And a lot of this stuff can actually kind of be negative and kind of destroy the market structure and the liquidity a bit. So yeah, it's just trying to like bake in a slight advantage for you guys so you can actually provide very tight liquidity and not worry about getting destroyed.
Very good question. Anyone else?
How would your fees look like compared to DEX?
Yeah, really good question. It's something we're still kind of going through the final kind of rounds of design and getting feedback from a bunch of traders on. Like ultimately, like to be competitive, we have to have competitive fees with the market leaders. So yeah, we're definitely going to have like lower fees than Hyperliquid at the moment. There are different models out there which I think are pretty interesting. Some people are going for retail price improvement, this RPI thing that Paradox and I think Extended and a few others do, which is pretty interesting. This just tries to do something similar to payment for order flow, where I think you're trying to match essentially like we talked about, the non-toxic like normal takers with market makers, and the market makers are kind of the ones that are profiting off the spreads and getting like really good order flow that they're not getting sniped on all the time. And there's that kind of arrangement which I think is interesting. We're looking into that. Lighter I think has done something kind of crazy, which is they just set 0 fees for everything. It does kind of encourage a lot of, I think, just like wash trading, which is maybe not great, and who knows what their volumes will kind of drop down to when they start introducing fees, after the points program goes out. I don't think that's necessarily a sustainable thing, but it's definitely a marketing tool for them that's done incredibly well. The model that we've used in the past that's been pretty successful is like, we care first and foremost about liquidity more so than volume. So setting taker fees that are reasonable, but actually giving a good maker rebate means that we're kind of like sacrificing our revenue, I guess, as a platform in the short term, being able to share that revenue and give some of the taker fees over to the market maker. The market maker, as a result, in real time is able to price things much, much tighter because they're kind of making back these rebates all the time. And you see this is like a very popular model on centralized exchanges like Binance. So we hope that can be something that encourages like really robust liquidity off the bat, and still hopefully having like not ridiculously high fees, like pretty reasonable fees.
And will you have points already on your day one?
That is the plan. It's being built right now. Dev is not here, but yeah, it's basically being built out because we're going out pretty soon. I am fairly confident they will be live. If it isn't live, we will at least like backfill. We want to make sure that people who are there day 0 kind of get rewarded the most. So yeah.
Awesome. I think that's everything. Unless there's one more question, we have time for maybe one more. But if not, we'll wrap up. Last call. All right. Well, thanks everyone for coming. Thanks Tristan and Bullet team. Great event. We're going to be hanging out, so come talk to us. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, perfect. If you see anyone in the Bullet or Celestia shirt, just definitely don't be a stranger. Come up and chat to us.
Cheers.
Cool.